Hello microeconomics students. This week I wanted to offer some assistance with Chapter 26, dealing with monopolistic competition. So in the first few problems it actually goes back to some previous concepts. Number one asks you to look at the concentration ratio, and if you remember, the concentration ratio is the combination of the top four. So for this one it's going to be a really simple matter of just adding those values up, and that gives you really the top four is what they should call it, concentration ratio. The next one is going back to the concept of elasticity, and it asks us to identify the percent increase in the price of a venti frappuccino. Well, they tell us that it went from $4.95 up from $4.65. So we can do the calculation, the percent change calculation, which is new minus old divided by old, and then multiply the result by 100. So in this case we've got $4.95 minus $4.65 over $4.65. Take that result and multiply it. So the percentage change is, in this case, and I'll go ahead and help you out because I think your numbers might be different than mine. So I took 30 cents. Just do this again, make sure I'm doing this right. 30 cents divided by 4.65, and that gives us about 6.4%, 6.45, just if you want to be a little more careful. And it does say to 2 decimal places, so 6.45%. Then the next one asks us, remember the concept of cross-price elasticity, or price elasticity, excuse me. And in this case, they give us the value, and so they say it's 0.2, and they say how much would unit sales drop? Well, we just calculated part of that, which is the percent change in price. And if you remember the formula for price elasticity of demand, I'll write it up here. It's percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. So we've already been given two pieces of information. We've got the PED value. We've got the percent change in price. We just calculated that, so it's going to be 6.45. And so we have to solve for this. And a little algebra will tell you that you multiply both sides by 6.45, and you're going to get a value of roughly, you're going to get about 1.28. And I'll tell you right now that in the book itself, or in the answer key, I guess I should say, they calculate it at about 1.25, give or take 0.01. So if you put it in at 1.25, I don't know if you'll have the same numbers. I think you might because the article's the same. If you put it in at 1.25, pro tip here, it's not going to work. And then after the price increase, total revenue would do what? And this goes back to the total revenue rule, and I'll just remind you about that. The total revenue rule says that if price goes up and total revenue goes up, then it's an inelastic, and if price goes up and total revenue goes down, it's elastic. Well, we already have the fact that it's inelastic. That 0.2 coefficient tells us that it is an inelastic relationship, that this price change is going to yield a very small relative quantity change. And so what we can say is total revenue is actually going to go up. And here's where I get that, because I already know that it's inelastic. And so price went up, right? It went from $4.65 to $4.95. So total revenue must necessarily then go up. So that's working a little backwards and being comfortable with the previous information about price elasticity. Number 5, another one, kind of a throwback, asks you about cross-price elasticity. And they say Starbucks raises its price by 5%. McDonald's experiences a 4.4% increase in demand for its coffee. What's the cross-price elasticity? Well, if you remember the formula, it's pretty easy. It's cross-price elasticity is equal to the percent, let me do this right, percent change in the quantity of good A versus the percent change in the price of good B. So here you've got the price increase for McDonald's is 0.5%, and you've got the the quantity demanded increase for the other one at 0.4%. And they're both positive numbers. So the calculation's pretty easy. If you had a negative number, which in this case you won't because they're both positive, then you would put that in your answer. So that one should be pretty manageable. And then 7 gets into the graph of the monopolistically competitive firm, and it just asks you to recognize where economic profit is equal to 0. And where economic profit is equal to 0 is where your average total cost is equal to the price you're receiving. So if you get, $1 in and it costs you $1 to produce it, then you've got 0 economic profit. So where average total cost is equal to price, another way of saying that is where demand, because the price is at the demand curve from the monopolistic competitor, is equal to ATC. 10 is a similar graph with the same kind of look at it. You're looking at short run versus long run. So in this case, let's start with the first one. It says identify the market outcome for short run equilibrium in competition. So in competition means that we're not looking at the firm, we're looking at the market. Let me see if I can make this work here. There we go. So the market. So in the initial stages, short run, we're going to go with demand now and marginal revenue now, marginal cost. Well, for a competitive market or competitive situation, it's simply supply equal to demand. And in this case, we said, well, for a firm, the supply curve is equal to the marginal cost curve. So this is going to be our supply curve. So we're just going to go to the point where supply equals demand in the short run. So that one's pretty easy to see. B says long run equilibrium output in competition. So we're going to, again, just look at supply equal to demand in the long run. So we'll go, here's our long run demand curve, and here's supply. And so again, we're going to just do supply equal to demand in the long run. So again, that shouldn't be a problem because that is competition. Then for C, long run equilibrium output in monopoly. So now for part C, we're going to assume that it's a monopolist making this decision in the long run. So we'll identify the later demand curve for the monopolist. We've got these two lines, demand and marginal revenue. So for the monopolist, it's going to be a long run decision is going to be here at C, because what they'll do is they'll produce at this point where demand is equal to their supply curve, and they'll carry it up to point C, and there we go. So that's the monopolist in the long run. And then finally, the long run equilibrium output in monopolistic competition, which is going to be in monopolistic competition, the long run by definition is where price is equal to average total cost. So if we're looking at this, we can see where the demand curve in the long run is equal to average total cost is going to be right here. Let me see if I can use a different color to help pinpoint that. But here's the point. So here's average total cost, here's the demand curve in the long run, and so it's going to be related to quantity. I think that's everything for that one. And the last one, this asks you to recognize what will happen if a successful advertising campaign is undertaken, and how that will affect the firm's costs and average total cost, demand, and marginal revenue. So that should be pretty straightforward, and you should be able to see how that advertising campaign will affect the monopolistic competitor. And remember that for the monopolistic competitor, that's their main way to shift the demand curve. So the idea behind advertising is to differentiate. So it will shift that demand and marginal revenue curve over. So remember that as you're answering that one. All right, I think that's everything for this last chapter, and I wish you lots of luck.